Imagine this. You walk into an interview room. Your heart is racing. Your hands are slightly sweaty. You've spent hours preparing answers in your head. You practiced, "Tell me about yourself," at least 20 times. But then the interviewer asks one unexpected question, and suddenly, your mind goes completely blank.
Honestly, that is one of the worst feelings ever.
It really is. And the surprising thing is that most people do not fail interviews because they are not smart enough or not qualified enough. They fail because of small mistakes they do not even realize they are making.
And sometimes those mistakes happen before the interview even starts.
Exactly. Maybe you arrive late. Maybe you speak too fast. Maybe you give answers that sound memorized and robotic. Or maybe you accidentally say something negative about your previous boss without thinking.
Oh wow, that one can destroy the mood instantly.
It can. And here's the scary part. Sometimes one tiny mistake can completely change how the interviewer sees you, even if you have the perfect resume, even if you have the right skills.
So in today's Talk Easy Daily episode, we are going to talk about the most common interview mistakes people make, and more importantly, how you can avoid them.
Exactly. Because once you understand these mistakes, you can walk into your next interview feeling calmer, smarter, and much more confident.
And make sure you stay until the end, because some of the biggest mistakes are the ones that seem completely harmless.
Very true. Some interview mistakes look small on the surface, but they can quietly ruin your chances without you even noticing.
I think a lot of viewers will relate to this because interviews are stressful for almost everyone.
Absolutely. Even highly experienced professionals get nervous before interviews. You could have 10 years of experience, an impressive resume, and amazing skills. But the moment you sit down in front of an interviewer, you suddenly start doubting yourself.
It is strange, right? You know who you are, you know what you can do, but in that moment, you feel pressure to sound perfect.
And that pressure is exactly what causes many mistakes. People start talking too much. They forget to listen carefully. They try too hard to impress. Or they become so nervous that they stop showing their real personality.
That is such an important point, because companies are not only hiring your skills, they are hiring you as a person too.
Exactly. Employers want someone who is capable, but they also want someone who is calm, positive, professional, and easy to work with.
So if you sound arrogant, negative, unprepared, or uninterested, even by accident, it can hurt your chances.
And here is something important for you to remember. Making mistakes in an interview does not mean you are bad at interviews. It simply means you need the right strategy.
I like that, because sometimes after one bad interview, people feel like they are terrible at all interviews forever.
But that is not true. Interviewing is a skill, and like any skill, you can improve it with practice.
So while you're watching this episode, think about your own interview experiences. Maybe you made one of these mistakes before. Maybe you're preparing for an interview right now.
And if that is you, comment below and tell us the interview question that makes you the most nervous.
Oh, that is a good one. For me, it would definitely be, what is your biggest weakness?
That question makes almost everyone uncomfortable.
And I have a feeling we are going to talk about that later.
We definitely are. But before we get there, let's start with one of the most common interview mistakes that happens before you even answer your first question. One of the biggest interview mistakes is arriving late.
That sounds obvious, but it happens more often than people think.
It does. And sometimes people think, if I'm only 5 minutes late, it's not a big deal. But in an interview, even 5 minutes can create a bad first impression.
Because the interviewer may think you are not reliable.
Exactly. They may think you are disorganized, careless, or not serious about the opportunity. And the worst part is that once a negative first impression starts, it can be very difficult to change it.
So what should people do to avoid this?
Always plan to arrive early. If your interview is in person, try to arrive at least 15 minutes before the scheduled time. That gives you time to relax, use the bathroom, check your appearance, and calm your nerves.
And if it is an online interview?
Then you should still be early. Log in at least 10 minutes before. Check your camera, check your microphone, check your internet connection.
Because nothing is worse than joining the interview late and saying, "Sorry, my laptop wasn't working."
Exactly. Technical problems happen, but when you prepare early, you give yourself time to solve them.
And I think being early also helps you feel more confident.
It really does. When you're rushing, your stress level goes up immediately, but when you arrive early, you feel more in control.
Here's a quick question for everyone watching. Are you the kind of person who arrives early, exactly on time, or always running late?
That answer says a lot about your habits.
And maybe today is the day you decide to become an arrive early person.
Another common interview mistake is not researching the company.
Oh, this one is huge.
It is. Imagine this. The interviewer asks, "Why do you want to work here?" And you answer, because I need a job?
That sounds terrible.
It does. But many people accidentally give answers like that because they did not spend enough time learning about the company.
So before any interview, you should know what the company does, what kind of products or services they offer, and maybe even their mission or values.
Exactly. You don't need to know every detail, but you should know enough to show that you care.
Because if you don't know anything about the company, it makes it seem like you are applying everywhere without thinking.
And companies want to feel special. They want to believe that you chose them for a reason.
So instead of saying, "I just need a job," you can say something like, "I admire how your company focuses on customer service," or "I like that your team values innovation."
Exactly. That sounds much more professional and thoughtful.
And here's something interesting. Researching the company also helps you feel less nervous.
That is true, because when you know more about the company, you feel more prepared, and preparation creates confidence.
I remember one time a friend of mine went to an interview and accidentally confused the company with a completely different company.
That is painful.
She started talking about the wrong products, and the interviewer looked so confused.
That's exactly why preparation matters. Even 10 minutes of research can save you from an embarrassing moment like that.
And while we're talking about preparation, there's another mistake people make all the time. They do not prepare answers to common interview questions.
Yes, some people think they can just wing it.
Which sounds confident at first, until the interviewer asks a basic question and suddenly you have no idea what to say.
Exactly. There are some questions that appear in almost every interview. Questions like, "Tell me about yourself. Why do you want this job? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Why did you leave your last job?"
If you know these questions are probably coming, it makes sense to prepare for them.
Absolutely. You don't need to memorize a perfect speech word for word, because that can make you sound robotic, but you should have a general idea of what you want to say.
That is such an important balance. Prepared, but still natural.
Exactly. The goal is not to sound like a machine reading a script. The goal is to sound confident and genuine.
And let's talk about one answer that many people get wrong. Tell me about yourself.
Ah, yes, one of the most famous interview questions.
And one of the most dangerous.
Because many people answer it the wrong way. They start talking about where they were born, how many siblings they have, what food they like, or what they do on weekends.
Which is not really what the interviewer wants to know.
Exactly. When the interviewer says, "Tell me about yourself," they usually want a quick professional summary.
So something like your experience, your skills, and why you are interested in this role.
Exactly. A strong answer could sound like this. "I have worked in customer service for 3 years, and I enjoy helping people solve problems. In my last role, I improved customer satisfaction scores, and now I am looking for an opportunity to grow in a larger company."
That sounds clear, professional, and focused.
And it tells the interviewer exactly why you are a good fit.
Here is a myth that many people believe. They think the more they talk, the more impressive they sound.
But in reality, talking too much can hurt you.
Definitely. Some people answer one question for 5 or 10 minutes.
And by the end, the interviewer has completely forgotten the original question.
That is why it is important to keep your answers clear and organized.
Exactly. One good technique is to answer in 3 parts. First, answer the question directly. Second, give an example. Third, explain the result.
That structure can make your answers sound much more professional.
And it also helps you avoid rambling.
Because when you are nervous, it is easy to keep talking and talking.
Very true. Silence can feel uncomfortable, so people often fill it with unnecessary words.
But sometimes a short, clear answer is much more powerful than a long, confusing one.
Absolutely. And speaking of confusing answers, another major mistake is being too negative about your previous job, boss, or coworkers.
This is such a big one.
Imagine the interviewer asks, "Why did you leave your last job?" And you say, "Because my boss was terrible, my coworkers were lazy, and the company was a disaster."
Even if that is true, it sounds really bad.
It does, because the interviewer may start wondering, if this person talks this way about their old company, what will they say about us later?
So even if you had a bad experience, it is better to stay calm and professional.
Exactly. You can say something like, "I learned a lot in my previous role, but I'm looking for new challenges and more opportunities to grow."
That sounds much better.
It does. You never want to sound bitter or angry in an interview.
Because interviews are not only about your experience, they are also about your attitude.
Exactly. And if you have ever had a bad boss or difficult coworkers, do not worry. You are definitely not alone.
Oh, everyone has at least one story.
They do. But the smartest people know how to talk about those experiences in a calm, professional way.
And in the next part, we are going to talk about some of the most surprising mistakes people make with body language, eye contact, confidence, and even the questions they ask at the end of the interview.
Let's talk about body language, because sometimes you can say all the right words, but your body is saying something completely different.
That is so true. You can look nervous even when you are trying to sound confident.
Exactly. Imagine someone walks into an interview with their shoulders down, avoids eye contact, barely smiles, and speaks in a very quiet voice.
Even if they are qualified, they might seem unsure of themselves.
And confidence matters. Not fake confidence, not arrogance, just calm, professional confidence.
So what kind of body language creates a good impression?
Sit up straight, smile naturally, make eye contact, shake hands firmly if appropriate. Keep your arms relaxed instead of crossed.
Crossed arms can make you seem closed off.
Exactly. And constantly looking at the floor or ceiling can make you seem uncomfortable or unprepared.
I think eye contact is one of the hardest things for nervous people.
It is, especially when you are anxious. But you don't need to stare at someone in an intense way. Just try to look at them naturally while speaking and listening.
And for online interviews, I heard that looking at the camera instead of the screen can help.
Yes, because looking at the camera creates the feeling of eye contact.
Here's a funny story. One time I had an online meeting and I kept looking at my own face on the screen instead of the camera.
A lot of people do that.
And afterward, I realized it probably looked like I was distracted the entire time.
Exactly. Small details matter. And here's another body language mistake people make. They move too much.
Like touching their face, moving their hands constantly, or shaking their leg?
Yes, those habits can make you look nervous. Of course, a little movement is normal, but too much movement can distract the interviewer.
So the goal is to appear calm and steady.
Exactly. Think of your body language as part of your message. You want your words and your body to send the same message.
Calm, professional, friendly.
Exactly.
Another mistake people don't realize they are making, they focus too much on themselves.
That is a great point. Some candidates spend the entire interview talking only about what they want.
Like salary, vacation days, flexible hours, promotions.
Exactly. And while those things are important, if that's all you talk about, it can make you seem selfish.
Because the company is thinking, what can this person do for us?
Right. A good interview should feel balanced. You want to show how your skills can help the company.
So instead of saying, I want this job because I want more money, you could say, I want this role because I believe my experience can help your team grow.
Exactly. That creates a much stronger impression.
And eventually, yes, you can ask about salary and benefits.
Of course, those questions matter, but timing is important.
So maybe do not ask about vacation days in the first 5 minutes.
Exactly. That can make it seem like you care more about avoiding work than doing good work.
Here is a surprising mistake. Some people don't ask any questions at the end of the interview.
And that is a missed opportunity.
Because almost every interviewer says something like, do you have any questions for us?
Exactly. And if you say, no, I think I'm fine, it can make you seem uninterested.
Even if you are actually interested.
Right. Asking questions shows curiosity, preparation, and enthusiasm.
So what are some good questions people can ask?
You can ask things like, what does success look like in this role? Or what are the biggest challenges for the team right now? Or what do you enjoy most about working here?
Those questions sound smart and professional.
They do. And they also help you learn if the company is really a good fit for you.
Because interviews are not just about the company choosing you. You are choosing them too.
Exactly. That is a very important mindset. Sometimes people act like the interviewer has all the power.
But you should also ask yourself, do I want to work here?
Absolutely. And asking thoughtful questions can help you answer that.
Here is a question for everyone watching. Have you ever left an interview and suddenly thought of the perfect answer or question, but it was too late?
That happens all the time.
It's like your brain starts working perfectly only after the interview is over.
Exactly. You leave the building and suddenly you think, why did I not say that?
That is why practice is so important.
It is. The more interviews you do, the more comfortable you become.
And even if you make mistakes, every interview teaches you something.
Absolutely. A bad interview is not the end of the world. It's experience, it's practice, it's feedback.
That is such a good reminder because people can be very hard on themselves after one bad interview.
They really can. They think, I failed. I ruined everything.
But sometimes you are learning skills that will help you get a much better opportunity later.
Exactly. And in the next part, we are going to talk about one of the most difficult parts of any interview: how to answer tough questions without sounding nervous, fake, or unprepared. One of the toughest moments in any interview is when the interviewer asks a difficult question that you are not expecting.
And suddenly your brain freezes.
Exactly. Your mind goes blank, your heart beats faster, and you start thinking, oh no, what should I say?
I think everyone has experienced that feeling at least once.
Absolutely. But here's the good news. Most difficult interview questions are not really about finding the perfect answer. They're about seeing how you think under pressure.
That's interesting.
For example, let's talk about the famous question, what is your biggest weakness?
The question everyone hates.
Exactly, and many people answer it badly. Some people try to sound perfect by saying something like, my biggest weakness is that I work too hard.
Which sounds fake.
Very fake. Interviewers hear that answer all the time, and it often sounds like the person is trying to avoid being honest.
So what is a better way to answer?
Choose a real weakness, but also show that you are working on improving it. For example, you could say, in the past, I sometimes had trouble delegating tasks because I wanted everything to be perfect, but I've been learning to trust my team more and communicate more clearly.
That sounds much more believable.
Exactly. You're showing self-awareness, honesty, and growth.
So the goal is not to pretend you have no weaknesses.
Right. The goal is to show that you understand yourself and that you're trying to improve.
Another difficult question is, why should we hire you?
Yes, that question makes many people nervous because it feels like you have to prove your value in one sentence.
And some people become too humble.
Exactly. They say things like, well, I don't know if I'm the best person.
Which immediately sounds uncertain.
Right. An interview is not the time to hide your strengths. You don't need to sound arrogant, but you should be able to explain clearly why you're a strong candidate.
So maybe something like, you should hire me because I have experience in this field, I work well with teams, and I enjoy solving problems.
Exactly. Then you can add a real example to make it stronger.
Because examples make your answers feel more real.
They do. If you say, I'm a good leader, that's okay. But if you say, in my previous role, I led a project that improved sales by 20%, that's much more powerful.
Facts are stronger than opinions.
Exactly. And here's another difficult question people struggle with. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I never know how to answer that one.
Many people don't. Some people answer in a way that sounds too ambitious. Others sound like they have no direction at all.
Like saying, I want to be your boss.
Exactly. That can sound strange. But saying, I have no idea, can also sound bad.
So what's the best approach?
Focus on growth. You can say something like, in 5 years, I hope to continue building my skills, take on more responsibility, and grow within a company like this one.
That sounds realistic and professional.
Exactly. You want to sound motivated without sounding unrealistic.
There's another difficult moment in interviews that people rarely talk about, when the interviewer asks about a gap in your resume.
That can be very stressful.
Especially if you were unemployed for a long time.
Yes, people often feel embarrassed about that, but the truth is, many people have resume gaps for different reasons.
Maybe they were studying, taking care of family, recovering from burnout, or searching for the right opportunity.
Exactly. The important thing is to stay calm and explain it honestly.
So instead of sounding embarrassed, you can focus on what you learned during that time.
Exactly. For example, you could say, during that period, I took online courses, improved my skills, and focused on finding the right role.
That sounds much better than panicking.
Definitely. Remember, confidence is not about having a perfect story. It's about being able to explain your story calmly.
That is such a powerful sentence.
And here's another mistake people make with difficult questions. They answer too quickly.
Because they panic.
Exactly. They think silence is bad, so they immediately start talking without thinking.
But sometimes taking a few seconds is actually smarter.
Absolutely. If you get a difficult question, it's okay to pause for a moment and think.
That makes you seem thoughtful, not weak.
Exactly.
You can even say something like, "That's a great question. Let me think for a second."
That sounds calm and confident.
It does, and it gives your brain time to organize your answer.
Here's a quick tip for everyone watching. If you have an interview coming soon, practice answering difficult questions out loud, not just in your head.
That's a great tip.
Because sometimes an answer sounds perfect in your mind, but when you actually say it, it feels awkward.
Exactly. Speaking out loud helps you hear how natural your answer sounds.
And maybe even record yourself.
Yes, recording yourself can be uncomfortable, but it's incredibly helpful.
Because then you notice things you normally wouldn't notice.
Like speaking too fast, saying too much, or repeating the same words again and again.
I think many people would be surprised if they watched themselves in a practice interview.
Definitely. Sometimes you don't realize your habits until you see them.
And here's something important to remember. You don't need to sound perfect.
Absolutely. Interviewers are not looking for robots. They're looking for real people.
So if you make a small mistake, it's okay.
Very okay. You can laugh, correct yourself, and continue.
Because confidence is not about never making mistakes. It's about staying calm when mistakes happen.
Exactly. And that mindset can completely change the way you feel in interviews.
In the next part, we are going to talk about real interview stories, common disasters, and the lessons you can learn from them before your next interview.
Let's talk about real interview disasters, because sometimes the fastest way to learn is by hearing what went wrong with someone else.
And honestly, some of these stories are painful.
They are, but they're also very useful because they show how small mistakes can create big problems.
Okay, give us the first one.
One person went into an interview feeling very confident. They had a strong resume, good experience, and they thought they were perfectly prepared. Then the interviewer asked a simple question, "Why do you want to work here?"
That seems easy.
It should be, but the candidate panicked and said, "Honestly, I just need money."
Oh no!
Exactly. Now, of course, everyone works for money. That's obvious. But that answer made it sound like they didn't care about the company, the role, or the opportunity.
It made it sound like they would take any job anywhere.
Exactly. And that's not what companies want to hear.
So what would have been a better answer?
Something like, "I want to work here because I admire the company's values, and I think this role is a good match for my skills."
Same basic idea, but much more professional.
Exactly. Here's another story. One candidate arrived late because they thought they knew the location of the interview, but they did not check the address carefully.
Let me guess, they went to the wrong building.
Exactly. And by the time they found the correct place, they were almost 30 minutes late.
That is a nightmare.
It is. And when they finally arrived, they were sweating, out of breath, stressed, and embarrassed.
Which means they probably could not perform well even after they got there.
Exactly. Their mind was already full of panic.
That is why planning matters.
It really does. Always check the address, the traffic, the parking situation, and how long the trip will take.
And maybe even visit the location before the interview if possible.
That can be very helpful.
What is another common interview disaster?
One of the most common is talking too much.
I think nervous people do this a lot.
They do. There was one candidate who answered every question with extremely long stories.
Even simple questions?
Even very simple questions. The interviewer asked, "What are your strengths?" And the candidate talked for almost 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yes, they talked about school, childhood experiences, old jobs, random hobbies, and by the end, nobody even remembered what the original question was.
That is actually kind of funny.
It is funny now, but in the moment, it probably felt very uncomfortable.
So what lesson can people learn from that?
Keep your answers focused. If you notice that you've been talking for a long time, pause and ask yourself, "Am I still answering the question?"
That is such a useful habit.
It is. Another story involves a candidate who interrupted the interviewer several times.
Oh, that is dangerous.
Very dangerous. The candidate was excited and wanted to show confidence, but they kept speaking before the interviewer finished the question.
Which can seem rude.
Exactly. Even if you're enthusiastic, interrupting someone can make you seem impatient or disrespectful.
So it's important to listen fully before answering.
Absolutely. Good communication is not just about speaking well, it's also about listening well.
I think people forget that interviews are conversations.
Exactly. They're not speeches, they're conversations.
Here's one I've heard before. Someone forgot to silence their phone during the interview.
That happens more often than you would think.
And then suddenly their phone starts ringing in the middle of the interview.
Or even worse, they get constant message notifications.
That can make you seem distracted or unprofessional.
Exactly. Before any interview, put your phone on silent or turn it off completely.
Such a small thing, but it matters.
It really does. And here's another story that teaches an important lesson. One candidate was asked, "What is your greatest achievement?" Instead of giving a real example, they gave a very vague answer.
Like what?
They said, "I think I'm just a hard-working person."
That's not really an achievement.
Exactly. It was too general. It didn't tell the interviewer anything memorable.
So what would have been stronger?
A specific story. For example, at my last job, I helped organize a project that improved customer satisfaction by 15%.
That's much stronger because it feels real.
Exactly. Specific details make your answers more powerful.
Because anyone can say they're hardworking.
Right, but not everyone can give a clear example that proves it.
Here's a surprising mistake. Some people become too casual in interviews.
Yes, they speak too informally, make too many jokes, or act like they're talking to a friend.
I guess they're trying to seem relaxed.
Exactly, but there's a difference between being friendly and being unprofessional.
So maybe do not call the interviewer bro.
Definitely not.
Or say things like, yeah, this job seems easy.
Exactly. Those comments can create a very bad impression.
It's better to stay polite and professional, even if the interviewer is very relaxed.
Absolutely. Match the energy, but stay professional.
Here's another painful story. A candidate was asked, "Do you have any questions for us?" And they said, "No, not really. I just want to know how much vacation time I get."
That's not a great ending.
Because it sounds like they only care about time off.
Exactly. Again, vacation is important, but if that's your only question, it creates the wrong impression.
You want to leave the interview sounding curious and motivated.
Exactly. You want the interviewer to think, this person is genuinely interested in the role.
Here's something I think viewers need to hear. Even strong candidates make mistakes.
Absolutely. Nobody gives a perfect interview every single time.
Sometimes you forget a word, sometimes you get nervous, sometimes you answer one question badly.
That's completely normal.
The key is not to panic.
Exactly. One small mistake doesn't destroy your entire interview.
That's important because many people make one mistake and then spend the rest of the interview thinking about it.
And then they lose focus completely.
Instead, just move on.
Exactly. If you say something awkward, take a breath and continue.
Because the interviewer may not even notice the mistake as much as you think.
Very true. We're often much harder on ourselves than other people are.
So if you're preparing for an interview right now, remember this. You don't need to be perfect.
You just need to be prepared, professional, and calm.
And in the next part, we're going to go even deeper. We'll talk about advanced interview strategies that can make you stand out from everyone else in the room.
Here's something most people don't realize. In a competitive interview, being qualified is often not enough.
Because almost everyone is qualified.
Exactly. Many candidates have similar resumes, similar education, and similar experience. So if you want to stand out, you need to give the interviewer something memorable.
Something that makes them think, I remember that person.
Exactly. One of the best ways to do that is by using strong stories.
Stories are powerful because people remember them more than facts.
They do. Imagine two candidates. One says, I'm a good problem solver. The other says, at my last job, we lost an important client because of a delivery problem. I stayed late, spoke directly with the client, organized a new shipment, and saved the relationship.
The second person sounds much more impressive.
Exactly, because the interviewer can picture the situation in their mind.
So, if you want to stand out, you should prepare a few short stories about your work experience.
Absolutely. Prepare stories about challenges you solved, goals you achieved, mistakes you learned from, and times you worked well with a team.
That sounds much more memorable than just saying I'm hardworking.
Exactly. And one technique that can help is called the STAR method.
I've heard of that before, but I always forget what it means.
STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result.
So first you explain the situation.
Right. Then you explain the task or problem. Then you explain what action you took. And finally, you explain the result.
That makes your answer sound much more organized.
Exactly. Let's say the interviewer asks, "Tell me about a time you handled a difficult customer."
Okay.
You could say, "A customer was upset because their order arrived late. My task was to solve the problem and keep the customer happy. I apologized, found a faster delivery option, and gave them a discount on their next order. As a result, the customer stayed with the company and even left a positive review."
That answer sounds professional, clear, and easy to follow.
Exactly. And the more organized your answers sound, the more confident you appear.
Another advanced strategy is matching your answers to the company's needs.
That's a great point. Many people only talk about themselves in interviews.
But the smartest candidates connect their experience to the company.
Exactly. For example, if the company values teamwork, you should talk about times you worked well in a team.
If the company cares about customer service, you should mention your customer service skills.
Exactly. The goal is to make the interviewer think, this person is exactly what we need.
So before the interview, it is smart to study the job description carefully.
Very smart. Look for keywords. If the job description says they want someone who is organized, adaptable, and good at communication, then make sure your answers include those qualities.
Because then your experience matches what they are looking for.
Exactly. Another advanced strategy is learning how to sound confident without sounding arrogant.
That balance is difficult.
It is. Some people are too shy in interviews. They hide their achievements because they don't want to seem proud.
While other people go too far and sound arrogant,
Exactly. They talk like they're the smartest person in the world.
which can be very annoying.
It can. The best approach is to speak proudly about your achievements, but also stay humble.
So instead of saying, I was the only reason the company succeeded, you could say, I was proud to contribute to a successful project with my team.
Exactly. That sounds confident and respectful at the same time.
Here is another strategy that people forget. Your energy matters.
Absolutely. If you sound bored, tired, or uninterested, even great answers can lose their power.
Because energy is contagious.
Exactly. If you speak with enthusiasm, smile, and show interest, the interviewer is more likely to feel positive about you.
That doesn't mean acting fake.
No, it just means showing that you were genuinely interested in the opportunity.
I think people underestimate how much enthusiasm can help.
They do. Imagine two candidates with the same skills. One sounds bored, the other sounds excited and motivated.
Most companies will choose the motivated person.
Exactly, because skills can be taught, but attitude is much harder to teach.
Here's a small tip that can make a big difference. Use the interviewer's name naturally during the conversation.
That's a great tip.
Because when you use someone's name, it feels more personal.
Exactly. For example, if the interviewer's name is Sarah, you could say, "That's a great question, Sarah."
It sounds warm and professional.
Exactly, but don't overdo it.
Right, because if you say their name in every sentence, it starts to sound strange.
Very strange. Another advanced strategy is following up after the interview.
This is something so many people forget.
They finish the interview and think the process is over.
But sending a short thank you email can leave a great impression.
Because it shows professionalism. Exactly. You can write something simple like, "Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I enjoyed learning more about the role and your team."
That sounds polite and thoughtful.
It does, and sometimes that small follow-up can help you stand out from other candidates.
Because most people never send one.
Exactly. Here's something important for everyone watching. Interviews are not only about answering questions.
They're about building trust.
Exactly. The interviewer is asking themselves, can I trust this person? Can I work with this person every day?
Will this person make my team better?
And your answers, attitude, and body language all help answer those questions.
Exactly. That's why preparation matters so much.
Because when you prepare well, you feel calmer.
And when you feel calmer, you perform better.
Here's a challenge for everyone watching. Before your next interview, practice your answers with a friend, family member, or even in front of a mirror.
That can make a huge difference.
Because the more you practice, the more natural your answers will feel.
Exactly. And remember, confidence doesn't come from luck.
It comes from preparation.
Absolutely. And in the next part, we're going to recap everything we learned today and talk about how you can walk into your next interview with a completely different mindset. If there's one big lesson from today, it's this: most interview mistakes are avoidable.
That's such a good thing to remember.
Because many people believe interview success is only about talent or luck, but in reality, preparation gives you a huge advantage.
If you arrive early, research the company, prepare your answers, and stay calm, you're already ahead of many other candidates.
Exactly. And let's quickly remember some of the biggest mistakes we talked about today.
Arriving late,
Not researching the company,
talking too much,
speaking negatively about your old boss or coworkers,
not preparing for common questions,
bad body language,
pretending to know something when you don't,
not asking questions at the end of the interview.
and forgetting to follow up afterward.
Exactly. These mistakes may seem small, but together they can completely change the way an interviewer sees you.
But the good news is that every single one of these mistakes can be improved.
Absolutely. And the more you practice, the easier interviews become.
I think that's important because sometimes people think, I'm just bad at interviews.
But usually they're not bad at interviews, they're just inexperienced.
That's a huge difference.
It is. Think about driving a car for the first time. You're nervous, you make mistakes, you overthink everything.
But after enough practice, it becomes natural.
Exactly. Interviews are the same way. The first few may feel uncomfortable, but each one teaches you something valuable.
Maybe one interview teaches you to prepare better.
Maybe another teaches you to slow down and stop talking so much.
Maybe another teaches you to be more confident.
Exactly. Every interview is practice for the next one.
And here's something else people forget. Sometimes you can do everything right and still not get the job.
That's very true.
And when that happens, it doesn't always mean you failed.
Exactly. Maybe the company chose someone with more experience. Maybe they hired someone internally. Maybe they were looking for something very specific.
That's why you should never let one rejection destroy your confidence.
Absolutely. Rejection is part of the process.
Even very successful people have been rejected many times.
They have. The difference is that successful people don't let rejection stop them.
They learn from it.
Exactly. They ask themselves, what can I improve next time?
That mindset can change everything.
It really can, because when you stop seeing interviews as scary tests and start seeing them as opportunities to learn, you become much more relaxed.
And when you're relaxed, you sound more natural.
Exactly. You smile more, you think more clearly, you answer better.
So before your next interview, don't just focus on being perfect.
Focus on being prepared.
Focus on being professional.
Focus on being calm.
And most importantly, focus on being yourself.
Because interviewers don't want a perfect robot.
They want a real person they can trust.
Exactly. Someone who is honest, positive, willing to learn, and easy to work with.
So if you have an interview coming soon, we want you to remember this. You're probably more ready than you think.
You don't need to know every answer perfectly.
You don't need to have a perfect resume.
You don't need to be the smartest person in the room.
You just need to show that you're prepared, professional, and ready to grow.
And that can make a bigger difference than you realize.
If this episode helped you, make sure you like the video and subscribe to Talk Easy Daily.
And comment below with the biggest interview mistake you've ever made or the interview question that makes you the most nervous.
Because your story might help someone else feel less alone.
Exactly. And if you know someone who has an interview coming soon, send them this video.
It could save them from making one of these common mistakes.
Thank you for spending time with us today.
And remember, Every interview is not just a chance to get a job.
It's also a chance to become more confident.
We'll see you in the next episode of Talk Easy Daily.